obviously they are adapted, the native, the wildlife in the area. Picture there on the left-hand side of blackbird. I think that's rowan that is eating. But likewise, and later on the year, you'll have, I grow a lot of holly, and you'll see a lot of certain point, thrush will come in and they're hordes, and you can go out one day, you basically have a lot of holly berries in the trees, and in a week or two later, they're all just stripped. So, the native wildlife's going to go for native trees, obviously, for the food source, because that's what we're familiar with, but it's not the only reason. Adapted to local conditions, the soils, and obviously more resilient. Our heritage, very important part, like down here in our village here in Mount Shannon, where I'm from, we got the largest oak tree in Ireland. So, like, it could be 700 years old. So that's part of our heritage. Similar trees around the country, and you want to try and, in my case, you'll be collecting seeds and trees like that to preserve them, the genetic heritage of them. And probably the most important thing about growing trees here in Ireland, as much as we can, is to prevent pest and disease imports. And we have very good examples, unfortunately, in the last few years of diseases coming in, the ash dieback being the most notable one. And unfortunately, more recent, we've had fire blight come and go throughout the decades in Ireland, but it's effectively widespread in Ireland, and primarily because, unfortunately, due to the importation of hawthorn from the continent. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. So the principles then of collecting seeds, sourced from a healthy trees, vigorous trees, mature trees. Very often, ironically, some of the trees with the most seeds are often. I'm a forester, so I'd be looking if it was thinking from forestry point of view, straight trees. But very often you'll have a situation where the worst trees, crooked, they're diseased, under pressure, will produce seeds. Not necessarily always a problem, but you should try and get from better trees. Like, for example, there, the bottom picture, that's canker, commonplace, and a lot of, let's say, cherry, and then more past ash. That's just one of many, but just healthy trees. Diversity, not to collect from one tree alone, because from a practical point of view, that tree may not have. You might look, the seeds might look okay, but even they may not. There could be duds. So you could spend a lot of effort collecting. So you should try and move around if the seeds are available to collect from a variety of different trees. And then timing is everything. Visual cues, waiting for the correct stage of maturity, and the obvious ones, just like in nature, red is the color of fruit being ripe. The red polyberries or the hawthorn. Um, the acorns, they would generally fall to the ground. That's how you know when they're ripe. They generally start falling. They're beginning to fall at the moment. Not quite fully yet, but in the next 2 weeks or so, they're going to be. This looks like it's going to be a good year for acorn. You have to be there on the ground then, because if you're not there on the ground, the deer and the rodents will eat them. Pines then are a different kettle of fish. You collect them later in the year. The picture there at the top then is Gilder Rose, and we have these were collected up in the burn. Gilder Rose, and to the left and right is Alder Buckthorn and Persian Buckthorn. So the season to collect, effectively it's all year round, depending on what way you want to do it. So it's not a case of, I missed the season, depending on what trees. I just here at the bottom of it start with, let's say, willows. You can literally start in January and you can go right through to November. You can take Christmas off. So all those, they're all sequential sort of, willows. You got the willow cuttings, then you got the willow seeds, and April elm and cherry, birch, rowan. They're all, September into October into November where you got the holly. And then down underneath you have the yolks in the autumn again, some of the repetition of above. I've also mentioned ash in there. I'm going to come back to ash later. There's a reason for that, because we basically forgot about ash as a tree to propagate in recent years. Collection. Again, hand picking is really the main reason, the main option for most people. It was big crops, and you were in a position you might put net or some sort of tarpaulin on the ground to collect the seed, which makes it obviously way more efficient. But for a lot of trees, you literally have to go out there, and it's obviously some of it's easier than others. Like, for instance, to collect the seeds, but I'm thinking actually it's more difficult for some, such as hawthorn, if you're trying to strip seeds off. But there's really no easy way of doing that in the hedgerow situation. And you just want to be careful what you're cutting. Like the top picture there now would be a good example of what you might not want to do is take the whole branch, where it's more like just cut the bare minimum the amount of fruit you want. In fact, I'm inclined to just strip the seeds off. I don't really like taking branches away. But in holly, that would be typical of what you might do. But you don't want to be going chopping the tree up, obviously, killing the goose that lays the golden eggs, as I would say. Then when you get them, you have to clean them and process them in some form or another. That all depends on the species. Like if it's a fleshy seed, such as let's say hawthorn, rowan, apple, crab apple, they would need to be crushed and pulped and washed to remove the flesh away because they're inclined to rot. Then you don't really have to do much with something like acorn. That's just a matter of putting them into um, sand or so and just watching them. But then there's different types of seeds, which I think the next slide should do. Yeah, so we got different types of seeds that you have to store. The way you store, so all seed is different the way you store it, as I say. Orthodox seeds, more types, e.g. pine and cherry. They can be pine, ash, and cherry just as examples. They can be stored for long periods of time. We're talking about years. Kept dry and cool, generally in refrigeration. Pine there, you don't need to read. They're just in a room, a cool room. Dry bag, airtight. Um, it's all, and then you have the other recalcitrant seeds, which can't be stored for a long time. This causes a big problem with acorns and oak production because when you get these mast years, um, that's brilliant. But there's then can be years where there's nothing, and this causes a constant problem in the nursery trade to supply trees continuously to meet the current demand, which is huge for native trees, that you could be waiting years. Probably they could do a little bit of storage for a year, maybe with in a fridge with the acorns, and you do lose some viability. But after that, then it really doesn't work. Again, as I said there, you need to keep them moist and cool and damp peat or sand. And then so quickly enough, then I will be sowing acorns. You could sow them direct if you're only talking a few handfuls, but you'll be sowing them within weeks probably of getting them in the practical situation that a lot of people here be in. I've been in more in the bigger nurseries a bit different. Very important to label the species, date, and location of where you got the seeds. When you suddenly end up like in that lower picture with loads of crates, very quickly you think one week you know what you have, a few weeks, months later you don't know which to wait. Particularly some seeds that might germinate. And very, very important is rats and mice. You can lose all your seeds in a few nights if you're not watching them. And you can be watching them, watching them, watching them. So if you are getting seeds and put them somewhere up on a shelf, but I would also say to put a mouse trap with their favorite mouse catching is peanut butter. They just can't resist it. I think it's as much to do with the smell. They can smell it from a distance. They just love it. So as I said, they can wipe all your efforts out in a few nights. Then once you move on from that, as I said, this is like literally just books on each one of these literally on each one of these slides you can buy books nearly on the whole thing. Like germination and pre-treatment is the big aspect. So you got your seeds. Generally speaking, we use the term stratification, and that's just putting layers aside. What historically would be the seed and then sand and the seed, and that's why it's called stratification. That would be used a lot now for holly and hawthorn and those longer term seeds. As I said, acorns and that, you can just, what I do is I keep them in the bag, watch them as they're germinating because generally most of them do germinate, but just to make sure they are, because I would direct seed into plugs, so like that bottom picture there, they're into plugs. So, but if you're going sowing in a field situation in a bed, that'd be different. Um, so down scarification, I see that here, here I put it down, but it's less so of a thing that we use. I often read about it, but I find it don't really need to do. The seeds seem to germinate because because you're there often afraid going tearing at seeds because you could damage them. But then you get something like Scots pine, and you collect the seed and you just sow them directly in the spring when temperatures are moving up. So beyond then your seed collection, there's cuttings, and the truth is, in fact, a lot of plants can be grown from cuttings. It's just there's a bit more skill involved in it. The obvious ones for cuttings are willows and poplars, um, and you take off a young fresh growth about the thickness of a pencil, no more than, sorry, no less than that, because they would generally rot. And in my situation, that's done. Obviously, it's done in winter, but it's done in the probably the worst time of the year, when it's very hard to either work outside, or there's just generally not as much work, so it fills that gap. But then, in saying that, whereas aspen is part of the populus family, it's the same thing. It's very difficult to root. So that's often propagated from rooted cuttings. So that's basically, you get a bit of root from the tree, and you layer it and then cover it on top, and little shoots come up out of that, and you cut them to length with the fibrous roots on them in the autumn, the following autumn. You probably do in the summer, but you're probably better off to the autumn. Grafting is not a technique, but that's really for ornamental trees and fruit trees to get true to type. So if you sow an apple seed from any of the apples you buy in the shop and think it's going to produce the same apple, it won't. It more than likely will be different because of the seed. So there, and then layering. That's generally, now the layering is and stewarding, but layering as such, in the normal sense, you might have seen it, where you have an aerial stem and there's a plastic with peat or something, sphagnum moss stuffed into it, and sealed up with black plastic, and it's left there for a year or so, and it can produce aerial roots. So I mentioned ash here, and I just thought I'd come back to this because it's been, it was one of the most common, would dare I say, back in a few years ago, before disease, it was widely planted. In truth, it was planted in a lot of places it should not have been planted. And them sites were probably one of the first to go with the ash dieback disease. But Chagas now are doing a lot of work on that, and a lot of research, and things are beginning to seem to be turning a corner on that. One of the things I have at the moment is a report citing of tolerant ash trees. And you can see there in the bottom left, this is up on their website. They're looking for people to report these trees that have very good, healthy foliage on them. But I don't see any reason, I don't why people can't even start this, because themselves. So if you see an ash tree there on class one, that you and I know it's this year, and talking to other people, that there's a lot of trees around this year. You can clearly see healthy ash trees now versus dying one. For a few years there, you didn't know what was dying and what wasn't. But now, I think it's pretty safe to say we can now see resistance. And thankfully, to me, it doesn't look like it's going to be anything like what happened with the yellow. As long as we can keep something else out, such as the emerald ash borer, which is decimating trees in America, and could come in and import a timber or something. But I think there's an opportunity there for people. And that's why I just put that slide up there, so that you could read it, just to collect it. And there's still probably some to be got. So if you saw some, you could easily propagate them yourself for your own use in your own farm. Um, to get us going thinking about ash again. As I said, it was very popular, and now it's gone. So that's it. And if nothing else, just I only not publicising Nike, just the logo, just do it. You're going to make mistakes, and if you don't try it, you won't know what the mistakes are, and you won't be able to improve it. And that link there at the bottom is to a very good Woodlands of Ireland. It was published around 2000, and nearly any information you need about growing Irish tree seeds is at that link. So that would be a very useful link to, click on and download, because it'll give you the information to fill in all the gaps that I couldn't talk about in this presentation. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Bernard, and very succinct as promised. That's fab, yeah. And I've also read that little guide there, the ones from Woodlands of Ireland, and it is really, really good. I will at some point there we go. Yeah, someone has posted it into the chat, which is great. So yeah, I would definitely recommend going there if you need to look into something in more detail after this. So I will start with a few questions that we had emailed in. The first of which I think is from Paula, who also put it in the chat, which is specifically growing trees from holly berries and from hawthorn berries. What's the recommended process?
Well, collect them first. So Yeah, now's the time to get. Well, sorry, the holly isn't ready yet, so the hawthorn are ready at the moment. You could probably maybe wait another week. It wouldn't be an immediate rush to go and collect them, but you could be collecting them. They had to be hawthorn. They need to be more pulped, as I said. With something like put into a bucket, and I don't know what sort of tool you'd use. Um, just to mash them up, basically, mash them, and then wash the pulp off them to get the seed out. And then that seed then is stored in sand. And that hawthorn isn't too bad now, but about a year in sand. And of course, as I said, a lot of us would think that the mice like the pulp. The mice will skip the pulp and go straight for the seed. And I've been caught so many times. And you're watching. You think they're not bothering. The next thing, bang, you go out and tore into a tray of seeds. So just because you got the pulp off and those little seeds, and they look like little stones, and you think nothing can eat them. So you need to be very careful about keeping the mice. So that's the hawthorn, and the holly's the same, but the holly seems to be more temperamental than the hawthorn. It could be. I've had seed that will not germinate. Looks like it's going to germinate, so it could take 2 years for the holly seed. But what you do is first clean them up, put them in sand, mix it up, so that all the seeds just nice and mix. That idea the sand is just keeps them damp into a crate, away from the rodents, in a cool place, and just keep an eye on them. And once 12 months is up, you need to start to look at them because depending on a whole variety of things, which I don't even think anybody knows because why use so much research into holly, um, they could start germinating. I've had that happen the weirdest times. This time last year, holly seed starting to germinate this time instead of, and they were looking at them all summer way in Germany, and then they all decided, right, we're going now. So you have to watch that because if they do that, you need to get them into trays. Just to sow them in flat bed trays because the radicle come out and it'll get too long, and then when you start, it'll both rot and then it'll get damaged in the sowing. Um, so yeah, the most important thing is to keep an eye on them, and not and you. But if you're pretty sure where you have them, as I said, mice, because I'll keep going on about that. It just can decimate a bucket of seed. So you just have to keep an eye on them. And it's probably as often I've said to people, it's easier to grow a few thousand of these plants than it is 50 because you're more committed because if you lose a few thousand, you're in trouble. Whereas you're 50, oh well. So you just have to keep an eye. If you're lucky enough to have a shed and you're pretty safe with a garage outside and you know that you've no mice in it and you're keeping your rat traps, mouse traps down on the shelf, cool shed, you're probably okay there. But as I said, then you need to keep an eye within 12 months because they could start germinating. Some of them. And then what happens with the holly, they all then come, or sorry, the hawthorn can all come on a go, but the holly, you might get a few, maybe 1 year, and then the next year, every one of them will germinate. So you could be talking about 2, 3 years, probably,
Mm.
to germinate. It's a bit of a commitment there.
I feel like you must have had a bad experience with mice recently. It's playing on your
Well,
mind, clearly.
if there's ever society of protection for mice, I'm in trouble, but that way. And the other one then I have a problem with is in the nursery is to become commonplace too, which might be good for owls, but not for me, is bank balls. And
Mm,
they don't so much go after the seed, but they will go after plants and trays, move into trays that might be half and can decimate them too. And they can climb, and I've seen them ring barred holly on me. So they're popping up now, bank falls. So, but that's a slightly different thing. But you need to be aware anybody that might be growing stuff, things can happen, not just mice.
and Paula also asked on the holly, can you grow holly from a cutting instead of from seed?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
You do them from now on, and fresh, and you probably need rooting powder and keep them damp in trays, white plastic,
Mm,
and just keep an eye on them. It's fairly straightforward. It's just a lot more. It's got its advantages too over seed, obviously, but it's very labor intensive, and obviously they're thorny, so they're slow to do.
mm,
Um, so you will need rooting powder and
mhm.
fresh growth. Yeah.
We have another question that was emailed in to us, and someone asked whether it's better to basically start the trees in a nursery that's kind of in shade or semi-shade or out in the open. And I would imagine this just depends on the species. But
Yeah. Well,
if you only want to do it in one place, maybe if there's a kind of rule of thumb.
I think like all plants like there's the plants in forestry. There's some of them are shade tolerant, but they all like light. It doesn't mean they
Mm.
don't like light. So plenty of I don't know whether it means shade now or shelter. But shade I wouldn't encourage people to be trying to grow
Mm.
anything in shade. They need plenty of light. Like I grow plants inside polytunnels and the plants they're right, they may be native there and you think should they'll grow grand outside, but when you put them inside a polytunnel, they love heat and water, just a bit like ourselves. So they grow really well like in that. So in terms of shade and someone I don't know what it means shelter now, but see, I wouldn't be trying to put honey plant where there's shade. You need to get them out in full light.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We all tolerate being in Ireland, but we'd all rather be on a beach in the sunshine, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And final question that we got emailed in, that kind of the pros and cons of growing things from seed versus growing them from cuttings, and if it just depends on the species or.
Yeah, it depends on the species. Like for instance, you wouldn't grow an oak from a cutting. You wouldn't grow a
Mhm.
Scots pine from cutting. You can grow them all from cutting. But the logistics of it, there's no reason. The reason you might do one or the others in my situation, like I might grow holly from cuttings is because I can't get holly seeds in bad year. You wouldn't grow willow. You can grow willows. I grow willows from seed and cuttings, but it's all then in my situation. It's a labour thing too because if you take the willow seed when they come out, we're too busy anyway. But there's nothing happening in winter, so taking cuttings of willows is quite. It's a good thing to be out in winter. You're inside, and it's workflow. But in general, you go for seeds because think about it, you just go gather, particularly now, a bucket full of hawthorn and you just sow them. Now hawthorn wouldn't be a good example because it doesn't grow well from cuttings. But seed, I think everybody, and you get that genetic because if you're taking cuttings out, I think it's the clone you're getting. So if you happen to take one cuttings off one bush, not a big deal. This really, but just as an example, you could, and something goes wrong in it, then they're probably all going to die from that, disease.
Mhm.
But there's different reasons why you do it. But seed first and coins second. And yeah, that'd be generally the way to go.
Great. Okay, I will move on to the questions that are in the chat and the Q&A. So someone asked about identifying ash trees that are kind of not suffering from dieback, and I know you had a slide in there in your presentation um, where it's based on the kind of healthy amount of healthy foliage. And is that
Yeah.
the only indicator, or are there other things to look out for?
No, that really is it. And it's very easy to do now. Now, of course, in a few weeks' time, things will change. The leaves are falling out. But if you go out now, literally see a bad ash tree beside a good one. It's literally that distinct. They're just because they're different clones, different genetics in them, which is great about the Irish population of ash. They have that diversity in them. So you just look at the tree. Yeah, if you just look, and the obvious one is the sick tree will have little, particularly at the tips. They may have a lot of foliage in the parts of it, but if you see like little sticks at the end of where the green foliage is, that's a sign it's got disease. You don't want to get anything off that.
Mm.
But its neighbour may have full leaf. Like that
Mm.
picture wasn't that clear. I tried to find a bigger one. They don't have a grey one now. I had to dig even around for that. But I think that's it. If you just scan the ash trees, you will see healthy ones. They're quite obvious at this time, compared to a sick one. That's what I'm saying. This year in particular, whatever about this year, I don't know whether it's a one-off or what is. They're very, very clearly to be seen that there's very healthy ash trees out there versus very, very sick ash trees. Whereas other years it was sort of, well, maybe that one's gone too. And even if you do collect from them, maybe anyway, there might be genetics in them that might be resistant to the disease. So I'm just talking about because I think it's a bit of a grey area. I did ask somebody that should know a little bit more than myself about this, and they weren't quite clear neither what the status is. But would they know within the horse trade, we're not encouraged, or it could be. I wouldn't be growing them to sell to anyway. So I just talked about here the hobby sort of person just for themselves and maybe to give
Mm.
to a neighbour or something, but not to sell. I'm not talking about selling these or anything like that. I just more interested in getting the ash back on this field because when I started my career in forestry, it was ash. We didn't have alder. Alder came out of nowhere in a few years, and we started planting alder. And one of the reasons ash was planted in a lot of sites it shouldn't have been planted was because there wasn't an alternative. We didn't have alder. Now alder's all right, but there's probably too much alder in some situations. But alder grows a different type of soil type. But thankfully, we now have Irish birch. It was grown from seed and improved. We got Irish improved birch. And now, of course, me talking here, Dom as a forester, straight trees and all that. But but the ash then, obviously, so we had the alder and the birch, and then we lost the ash. But hopefully, in the next 2 years, we're going to see ash plants come available again that are resistant to the work that's been done. And just to get people, my thing is to start having the conversation again. Let's get ready to start planting ash again.
Yeah, hopefully. I know what you mean though about this year. I feel like the ash really, the healthy ones popped out at me, like
Yeah.
late spring, early summer, and I was just like, wow, those are some really good looking ash there that don't seem to have suffered at
Yeah,
all.
because last year it was looked very bad, and it could be the weather. We had a very nice summer here in Ireland, thank God. We had it wasn't extremes or anything. We'd had dry spells, so maybe that just suited the ash. So maybe there's a blip there.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
like we lost our alum, and there's a bit elm, and the elm keeps coming back, and there's a few of us conversations sort of been had about just to start growing elm again. Obviously, you can buy resistant elm now from the more or less continental, but I don't know about the elm's growing up because we don't know. Sharon might know more about this. I don't know whether there's any record of what we might have lost in terms of species, associated species, insect life and so on with the elm, because at the time they went, was there any research done? We could be missing, insect life, fungi, God knows what, that are associated with the elm that we just forgotten about because at that time there was nobody doing any studies. So elm,
We didn't, but I know in Britain, I think it's the white letter hair streak butterfly is an elm feeder, and that really dropped off.
yeah,
Um, but that's started to come back a bit with the fact that elm, as long as you keep it small, say in a hedgerow, it'll survive. It's only once it gets bigger that the
yeah,
beetle gets in that
yeah,
it
yeah.
becomes a problem.
So
Interestingly, with ash, one of the things was you could lose a lot of the lichens that you get on ash, but because sycamore, the much vilified sycamore, has a similar pH bark, a lot of the ones that would grow on ash that we could have lost also will grow on sycamore. So
yeah, I personally, sycamore. I know there's people hate and so on, but I grow other trees too that they're not native and not don't mind. I think you need all these trees. Anyway, I don't want to go off topic, but it's interesting you should say that, Sharon, because I only surmised that, and there sort of turns out that it's true. So that's a reason maybe to be propagating. Not just for its timber, just to for other insect life. That who else a knock-on effect that might be to other birds or whatever it might be. I've no idea. But there is sort of a bit of a thinking that we should just stick in the elm, even though we know it's going to die. It's about 9 years, 12 years it sort of dies, as Sharon was sort of saying there. And there. So,
Um, we'll move on just because we have a lot of questions to get through. Um, so someone has asked what the best growing medium for propagating seeds is.
that's
So
very dangerous. That's a dangerous question to answer.
you're gonna say peat, is that why
I'm
it's
going to say
dangerous?
Pete, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to apologize for it, even if I'm going to be cancelled. Um, because it's sterile and it's got everything you need. You can adjust the pH, you can add nutrients. And in the scheme of things, because I've heard, I've talked to other growers, but people won't tell you their problems. There's work being done and a lot of people replaced. But in terms of the amount of seed that you use is so little. Um, Now, you grow acorns in really anything. This depends seed. I'm talking about finer seeds, but um, might sort of rephrase that. It just depends on the seed. The bigger seeds are very tolerant of a variety of things, so I wouldn't be too bothered. But once you get into the printed, let's say if you're growing uh, willow seeds, they're just like dust. Now I grow other plants too, and probably that's why my mind is sort of here. I grow wetland plants, so I need to know that I've got. Uh, the truth is, it does win hands down. And maybe if somebody can put up here and recommend another one, I'd love to know about. But my experience on talking to other people is you can get a good batch of seed compost, um, but the next batch isn't the same. They're not consistent. It's hard to get consistent product, and a
Mm.
lot of them they don't really tell you what's in them. And I like to know what I have in it, so I can control that. So I can control the pH, the fertilizer of it. So at the moment, peat wins. We don't have a huge amount of sustainable, lots of alternatives. There are, you can use peat free. I don't want to go up into that because that's going to get into another thing. But for me, I would prefer to start my seeds off in peat, particularly the smaller seeds. And I am trying other alternatives. But I prefer to use the peat free things in when the plants are actually up and going and they're established than take a chance, because if I lose them for somebody who's doing maybe as a hobby, it's obviously serious consequences. There's no income because I'm doing this as a business. There's some people working for me, so to pay the bills. So until somebody can say 100%, yeah, I won't be. No, and they are out there, but they're just harder to get, And the other thing about them is, I could be growing a range of plants, and they're all different. They like different pH and so on, different requirements. So what someone might say, oh, there is this mix and it works, but it might work for something else. It might work for oak, let's say, but it might work for spindle or it might work for gilded
Mm.
rose. And you see, some people think for me, the seed isn't just about germinating, it has to grow. And I do have my own problems too with certain batches, and it can take a few years to figure out what's going on. So you start slowly experimenting with something else. Like I do is anyway. That's my take on that.
Mm.
And we will, and in time we will have those alternatives, but because we've been spoiled by peat. It's the main thing that most people have. There hasn't been much work done.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a lot of people probably want to steer away. So I've noticed one person has already put in an alternative. So if anybody else has any good alternatives, feel free to put them into the chat. And also, yeah, I suppose if it's a hobby thing, definitely experimenting and then sharing that with everybody is a great thing to do. And Bernard, if you ever do come up with a magic solution, please share it
I,
with
I
us.
I know there's a company I came across, but there's a company in the UK I came across recently. Because of Brexit now, it's harder to get this material, and they seem to be coming up with a mix that's based on woodland, um, bark mulch, and so on. But I don't know now. Obviously, it just takes a while to find these other products that are reliable. And then if someone like coming in from the UK, you have to buy a full pallet, and then what if it doesn't work out? You're left with
Mm.
300 or 400 euro worth of a pallet of compost, that doesn't really grow a seed.
Um, yeah, is there something that's sort of easily available though that people could use? Say something, I don't know, something that people can easily get their hands on that they wouldn't have to buy a lot of. Um, that you know.
Without, sorry, I just missed that. Sorry, the first part of that.
Is there
That was
something that is easily available for people that they might be able to use?
are we talking about compost now?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there is. They're all in your garden centre. There's only a few. You see, there's only a few handful of companies that make this commercial.
Mm.
The Scots. There's Tipland. There's yeah, Classman. I'm trying to think, but there's a few of these. So you just have to go and hope for the best. Buy the compost. As I said, it's generally with the smaller seeds. In fairness, a lot of the seeds that we are talking about here, tree seeds, are too bad to be tolerant of it. You just might grow as well.
Mm.
And it really, once you go outside of it, see, I'm just seeing the ads, I see Mycorrhizal and things popping up, and that's all great. And I'm not getting any of that. Um, it just begins to, you can get overcomplicated. You just want to get these seeds growing. And so I would just go to a garden center and ask the garden. The best thing is to go to the garden center and ask them. And generally speaking, they're fairly genuine people that say that's the better one for growing seeds. And it probably potentially will be peat free. That's the best way of doing it. Like, just randomly looking up on Google and websites, you can't really tell. Go to a garden centre that you think you can trust, it will sell you something, and go from there.
Mhm. Thanks. Someone has asked on that. So, after the trees have been transplanted from their propagation box, do you then need to change the compost or leaf mold for another attempt?
Right. Well, it depends on what side of the pot you put them in. Like, I mean, I grow stuff sort of on contract with somebody else, and that's growing out in the field. So they go as little plants, and they go into commercial nursery. So if you're thinking of growing them on, you're better off like going back to our peat thing again. Small pots, peat or whatever media, but you're better off, probably more environmentally, is to go and get them into the ground in the field. But if you want to put them in the pot, yes, you have to renew the compost.
Mhm.
Because they're going to do it quickly, and particularly with these alternatives to peat, and if you're going down the whole organic route, is one of the big problems is that a lot of these composts have very low nutrient level, and you might get 6 months out of them, and after that, you probably notice that your plants are going yellow and the compost is breaking down. As I said, whether you like it or not, and whether people agree, peat, yeah, basically we're spoiled with it. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with peat, in my opinion, wasn't that a few of us were growing peas, that we burnt it. It blew it up chimneys, like, should have been kept. If that hadn't been happened, there'd be loads of bogs around. It wasn't pea harvested for potting plants. But I'm going afraid I'm going to go off topic and people start
Yeah, we'll
end up
keep to
having to
the
mend that.
yeah. Um, a really good question actually, which I would love to know about is someone has asked about how to lay out a small nursery. And that like because the layout is so important, I suppose, for saving time, they're talking about growing trees for their own farm.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how. Well, I think what the most important thing in any nursery is water. Um, so you need to make sure you have water and a good supply of water, not a dribble out of a pipe, because you might only need it in an open field nursery. You might only need it a few times a year. You could be wiped out in a drought. So, like in terms of you need a 3/4 inch supply, not a half-inch garden hose to find the back of your house. So water is the most important thing. I think your beds then you have to be able to, just like growing vegetables, I'm with growing vegetables, you have to be able to reach to both sides. So a bit over a meter wide. So you can
Mm.
stretch, not overstretch, and you can get to the middle easily. Decent wide footpaths so you can walk up and down. And if you can, if you're in a farm, you just can't be a nice open square. So if you are in a farm situation and you can get machinery in, is to leave plenty of room to get your tractor in and out to, because now, let's face it, labour is a problem everywhere. Trying to get people to do it. So if the more you can use machinery, the better. So plenty of room around the headlands and so on. So I'm trying to think what else, because that's such uh, weed control, big issue. You need to allow for rotation um, every year. So you'd have to have stale beds. So you need to allow for that. Um, I think that it's probably a lot more. And you can hear my dog barking, can you? I don't know what you can or not. Just hold on a second.
No worries. Speaking of that, actually, after all of your talk about mice, I can literally hear the mice in the walls of my house right now. So that's a little insight onto the glamour that's going on behind the
I just,
scenes here.
I just,
I'm just fighting the urge to go out and shoo them away. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting to say that because talking about not all mouse traps were created equal, and probably one of the best mouse traps is a brand called Luna, made in Germany. It's hard to believe somebody's still making mouse traps in Germany that they're not coming in from China. But I've literally tried. You think they're, mouse traps are basic, simple thing, but turn out they're the best mouse traps. So Luna mouse traps and peanut butter. That'll solve that problem.
Um, there's a couple of just quick questions on propagating different kind of types of seeds. I might just say that those we don't have a load of time left, and there's actually very good guides. That website that was posted, I'll post it again.
Yeah.
And the one that you recommended, it's if you maybe could post that link in the chat then towards the end, and then I would say people just go to that if you're looking for kind of a very specific what kind of compost to use with what kind of acorn, or what time of year to collect. There's good guides out there for specific trees. Someone has asked an interesting one, which they did get in contact with me about over email as well, is they've been, because Irish whitebeam is obviously quite a rare tree,
Yes.
and they've been kind of grafting this species as a way to increase the population.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you think that's kind of a viable alternative to, or how?
Yeah, well, pipeweed are difficult to grow. Seed don't seem to like storing. So yeah, that's a possibility. Again, small scale. How many? I presume they're talking about Sorbus hibernica, possibly,
Yeah,
and there's a few
that's
there.
it.
There's a lot of white beam out there, in the hybridized so much. I've spoken to Sharon about that before. I decided to keep away from them. It can be a bit hard to distinguish, but there's the Irish one anyway, and yeah, that's potentially an issue. Or not an issue, a possibility to get them, but because they're so hard to grow from seed. I've tried it, and they're not.
Mm.
Getting negative amount of germination, for the amount of seed you collect if you're lucky enough to come across them. Now, last year was a good year for sorbus, and I didn't collect much last year, but so there might be people out there now that will have a few plants more than they might have previously. Yeah, grafting that would be one way.
Yeah, but then obviously the seed that's you collect from them then isn't Sorbus hibernica. It's not Irish whitebeam, really, right?
When if the graft is if it's Sorbus hibernica and you collect seed from that and you graft it, then it is Sorbus hibernica. Yeah.
Okay.
But
So
I don't know what the person is exactly talking about. They're just thinking about this, or they're doing it, or what
they have
level they're
already
at.
done it. I
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
That we were talking about it. So then another question that's in the Q&A is on ash trees.
Mm.
Can you kind of save a diseased ash tree by cutting it back?
Yeah. There's, I don't know. I've heard people talk about this, and I haven't seen. I can't. I'm always afraid to say absolutely not, because there can be exceptions, but I think generally not, because that is a fungus, and the fungus gets into a tree, it just goes through it. I
Yeah.
think. Again, if you have a favorite tree, I'd always say, a tree that you particularly want, yeah, do it, try it, but it wouldn't be something I'd be promoting or telling people, oh, if you cut them back, because you'd often get a reaction with the trees, like when a tree's under stress, it will produce more branches, something to try and fight and try and survive. And that's what those little shoots are when you see some of these trees. And you say, oh, there's a lot of leaves on it, but they're kind of funny. There's twiggies. It's the tree fighting back, fighting with its life to try and survive. So you might cut it back and shoots might come up. But
I,
maybe over time, like the element's done something, like if you look at the elm does the same thing over and over again. It grows 9 years, it dies, it comes back. So there's nothing wrong with that in itself. But the idea that, oh, I might do this and my fully grown tree will come back in 15 years' time, I'll have a nice tree. That's my thoughts on it.
Most of the ones that I've seen that were diseased that have been cut down, they might sprout, but those sprouts are dead within a year or two.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to know. Other people have been talking to me about it, but I haven't heard any great cases of success either.
Yeah, I would prefer to, if you're, yeah, grow the seeds at this stage. And ash is very easy to grow. It's an easy enough one to grow too.
Mm-hmm. One person has asked about how to treat seeds from damsons, and I suppose I just wanted to touch on that. In that is growing seeds from fruit trees very different to growing native kind of woodland trees.
Yeah, I haven't done much with that, to be quite honest, but it's much the same too. You got a hard nut that has to be broken down over time, frost, bacterial, fungi breaking down seeds. So again, it'll be in that guide that we were talking about how to do
Mm-hmm.
that, put in sand in the store. Potentially, I think it's going to probably take 2 years to germinate them seeds. Sorry, at least 12 months, and it could be 2 years, depending on how hard they are.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no there isn't that much. It's just something I haven't personally grown. it sort of, no point. I've got caught so many times growing things people don't want. So if I thought there was people interested, I'd probably grow more of them. Hazel is one that's can be a bit tricky too. You think it should be, but it can decide to sit there and not do anything. So all these seeds, and the only way you're going to do is you literally have to try it. And then nowadays, you got Google, if things aren't going right, you just look it up and you'll read something or see a YouTube video that just say, oh, I need to try that.
Speaking of that, someone has posted the link to the guide in the chat. I'll just repost it there, which, yeah, is excellent. That's the one that we're talking about when we reference the guide. And yeah, I would definitely go to that for specific information. There's one question about keeping, sorry, I've lost it now, but whether you should keep haws in sand in a shed versus outdoors, and whether if they'll dry out if you keep them inside. Is that a worry that seeds might dry out?
Yeah, you'd have to keep an eye on that. You see, the reason I just said a shed was from the rodent point of view, because probably if you have a shed, generally you'll be keeping an eye on the rodents. If it's outside, you might forget. So you need to have them in a container that is off the ground, sort of, so that it's not sitting and there's holes in it, so the water just doesn't sit in it. So perforate and sand or something like that, perlite mixed up through it. So it's not just going to clog there and form a clump. You also would be advisable over the time, every few months, maybe to just stir it all up to get the seeds mixed so they are clumping together or getting spots or dry spots. But the shed, yeah, they're right. But I was just thinking, it's from the point of view of mice, because if they're outside and running outside the corner shed, it's just perfect opportunity for mice or rats to in a shed, and you just keep an eye on them. You can see the rats going into your shed. It's going to be a lot more obvious to you.
There's one question here which I think is really important, which we should address, which is, do you need a license to collect seed?
Yeah, well, you do in national parks. They obviously, and we do that through the Burren, as you probably know. What's that again, Sharon? I forget the name of it. There was forms filled out there for that.
Can't remember.
Yeah.
Activities requiring consent.
Yeah. So if it's in and this now you get into suddenly you can get into a very complicated. If you want to say if somebody was there, and I know this happened to somebody a few years ago, and it was a bit ironic because who would happened to they wanted to grow their own acorns to plant their own forest, and when the time came that all the pots ready to go from their own land, acorns, and they weren't allowed to plant them. They had to buy in, right? You couldn't make it up. They had to buy in oak trees from elsewhere. Probably God knows where they came from. They couldn't, and they had lots of them. And because they didn't get elected at the time, if you're doing it for forestry purposes, there's what's called a certificate of provenance. It's like a birth cert of the seed. So to get that, you have to say, first of all, apply to the Forest Service for a permit to collect the seed, and they issue you a number, and that's effectively the number that goes with that plant the day it's planted, and that gives us what's called a certificate of provenance. Say that it's Irish. There's also it gets all complicated. Now, just to go back in general, you just need a landowner's permission for the ordinary Joe soap. And as I said, if it's national park, you need their permission. So that's again the landowner, because if somebody went after a particular tree, because if I went out today into national park, so I'm only gathering up a bag, so that's a big deal. And then somebody else is in the following week, and somebody else the following week. Suddenly now there's no seeds left because everybody's having to go at them. So that's probably one of the reasons why there's a permit situation with the national parks, so they can keep an eye on who's taking it. There's not too many taking.
Yeah. So basically, you only need the landowner's permission, or if it's a national park.
In general, on non-designated land,
Yeah.
non-national parks land, or not quilcher land. So
Yeah.
again, it's against the landowner. You're going to be going back to say, can it go? And if it's national parks, they're going to say, hold on, no, you can't.
Yeah. Someone has asked, would you recommend using a mycorrhizal fungi addition for seed propagation or for a bare root tree planting?
I saw there somewhere, and somebody mentioned a brand.
Yeah, RHS Empathy Root Grow is the one that they mentioned.
No, I know there's a new company out. I think they kind of, Packet Soup Mary stuff or Johnny stuff. I don't know. Packet seeds, packet. I remember years ago being had a talk about that, and we're not about that specifically, but it came up. And the general consensus of people that were wiser than me was that they wouldn't buy stuff in packets. That a lot of that stuff isn't worth it. Now there is a brand, I cannot think of the name, Rhizocore. I think it's the name of their. I think they're British or UK, let's say, and they have pellets. They are going out and they're and the fact that you can sort of see, like as you might see with the pines, you can see the mycorrhiza. It's not just this bag of dust. So I wouldn't waste my money on those packets, to be honest, be blunt. Rhizocore, I don't know enough about them, but at least when I see the pellet, it's about an inch by an inch, and you can see the fungi on it. And apparently they've collected samples. Then there's a whole debate about that. Do you want to be bringing in mycorrhiza from somewhere else? So I would say keep away from that. Just if you were going down that road, if you were in a position to go to a tree, let's say you're growing hawthorn, and you said, and you could get a healthy hawthorn hedge tree, maybe bring a bit of that sample outside and mix it through it, and there'll be spores that. If that'd be a better option than going off and spending €15 on a packet of stuff. And
Mm.
because each mycorrhiza, they're all different. And then some trees don't have that mycorrhiza association, by Burnham and what do you call
Ash.
spindle. Pardon?
Ash
Which
doesn't either.
Yeah, so you're wasting your money. It doesn't have it. It's a different setup. I'm not creating my fungus, but it's certainly a fascinating area, and it's a novel of work, and it's been, you could say, once they rediscovered, being discovered, people realize, we're all obsessed with what's above ground, but what's going on below ground, and the person's on the right track. But I think that would be a better way to do it, is to go and get a little shovel full and sprinkle it in among your tray, than going off buying a packet. So you're growing hope. Um, go to a woodland, a healthy oak tree, and there should be some there.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think it's always a risk kind of bringing things in from
Yeah,
outside. And I actually used to do some horticultural research with mycorrhizal additives, and my experience was that they don't work either.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Now there is some bacterial, like if people are thinking about that. Some of the bacterial inoculants are quite good. There's a woman I deal with, Karen, and Pro-Biocarbon, I think it is. She sells inoculants that are very popular now with some of the bonsai people. And there's some people you listen to more so because bonsai is such a specialist area, and you're growing, this tree in a confined space, and there's a lot of people buying. And I've used their product, and I've got good results with it. That's made here in Ireland. She knows what she's selling. That's bacteria now, not mycorrhiza.
Um, okay, we have one question there from the Q&A. Is it okay to use acorns from kind of youngish trees that are about 20 years old?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Once they're an acorn, and they're viable. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I have a question which I was kind of saving for the end because I thought it might start quite a long discussion. But someone has asked why trees seem to be able to be so freely imported into Ireland, and that we do have a problem. They say bringing in diseases that have been mentioned, and that other island nations seem much better at biological protection.
Well, every country has their own plant health protection, and they all cooperate. So what you get when you bring in a plant from Holland is a plant passport, and that plant passport effectively says it's been issued by the department of the relevant country, stating that the plant doesn't have disease. And so the departments, in fairness to all of them, they do their best. But unfortunately, we do live in a commercial world, and people can find ways around things to will. And we've the horror story of all was with the ash, back when it came, where a certain country, and it was a charity in certain countries, decided that it was cheaper to grow their ash seeds in another country, and then the other country decided, well, we can send them further on and get them to grow cheaper.
Mm.
So, and nobody could really stop that from happening. In fairness to the Department of Agriculture and the plant health people, they can't, and they try to do their bit. So it's a free market. So in terms of moving across Europe, You can't really stop them. So what from our point of view, and like this presentation and many more about, is that we're creating awareness, so people are aware. And then they make that choice themselves. I want that hedge of hawthorn now, or I'll wait a year when I can get them. And if they want a hawthorn hedge from Irish stock, they might have to wait that year, and they just book them in time. So they don't wait till like the month of February, March, and say I want my hawthorn hedge now, and they're all gone. They're literally ordering now, and I even see that happening now with people. The people who ring you ahead and say, "Whereas heretofore it was like, Amazon, ring up today, I want it tomorrow." And that can be done, obviously, and they'll be got because they're there. Like, I mean, it's possible, amazingly, to buy 4 and 5 foot tall and 6 foot tall hawthorn instant hedges, in from the continent. I've heard them being planted up because certain organisations, that's what they want. So it's up to the public to make that choice, because once there's commerciality and there's money to be made, people will find ways around rules and regulations.
Yeah, I would something I definitely see quite often, or sometimes, is something to be wary of anyway, is something being called a native grown. Sometimes they're started from native seed and they're started in Ireland, but they're actually then kind of grown. They're sent to Holland, grown, and then imported back.
Once I see a very good point, the catalogue there, so they were highlighting that. But basically, I think it's 6 months if it's in Ireland, it'd be called Irish grown.
Yeah.
This is just like it's exact same with your food you're buying. There's an Irish flag in it, and you find out it's chicken from Malaysia packed in Ireland, or somewhere, and you think, oh, that's Irish, and it's getting more, but you just have to be aware. That's happening. That's another problem. People find ways around the regulations. So people just have to be aware and make themselves educated. Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask one more question, quick answer, and then we're gonna have to wrap up because it's pretty much 9. So someone has asked, is there any benefit to collecting seed from an ancient or kind of veteran tree instead of a young tree?
Well, the obvious one, back to what we were just talking about, is that if it's a 500-year-old tree, it's been here for 500 years. Whereas the tree that you might think is old might actually be either planted by somebody imported, or it's come from a plant, that was, so it's not that long. So there is an advantage. Your genetics, all that comes with that, resistant to disease, the climate, probably things we don't even know about, that we're only beginning to find out about, like how the mycorrhiza interacts with roots. So yes, absolutely, there is, and your heritage, you're keeping something going that's been there. But yeah, definitely there is I think if you had an option between two, a bag full from a veteran tree or a young tree, I'd be going for the veteran tree any day. Yeah, the tree that's been there hundreds and hundreds of years, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's pretty much all we have time for then. So thank you so much, Sharon and Bernard. That was great. It was a real marathon of questions. And I actually think for once we got through pretty much all the questions. If there's something that I missed, then I'll try and get back to you. I'm also gonna post the recorded session on YouTube. So if you want to go back and look at something, that'll be coming up in the next couple of days. And I think everyone knows this, but obviously the Hare's Corner is an initiative of Burn BO Trust. So if you want to become a member or support us by donating, we really do appreciate it. And our next clinic is going to be the second Monday of October, which is the 13th at 8 p.m. And I have put a link there to that in the chat. And it's going to be wildlife hedges. So hope to see at least some of you there. So yeah, that's it. Thanks so much, Sharon and Bernard. That was great. And yeah, I'll leave the Zoom running just for a few minutes, just so people can copy whatever they need to from the chat. So thanks very much. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.